Wouldn't it be like the most petty, humiliating, yet startling thing if I just fired my hat at him?
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Initially famous for his acting on TV, Ron Howard has grown up on screen right before our eyes. Now he is one of Hollywood's leading directors and producers.
Ron Howard's career is often defined by the words gentleman, collaborator, peacemaker. For decades, he's worn the crown of Hollywood's nicest guy. But behind that patient smile lies a single wound so deep it still aches when his name is paired with another, Henry Winkler. Non-screen, their partnership looked unbreakable. In the 1970s, Happy Days wasn't just a hit sitcom, it was a cultural earthquake. Howard played Richie Cunningham, the wholesome redhead next door. Winkler played Arthur the Fonz Fonzarelli, the leather-jacketed rebel who oozed cool. Together, they seemed like brothers, a pairing that carried ABC to record-breaking ratings. But off-screen, cracks began to form. At first, it was small. Winkler's Fonz started stealing the spotlight. Audiences cheered his every line, magazines splashed his face across covers, and suddenly the quiet Richie, the show's intended lead, was playing second fiddle. For Howard, who had grown up in the industry, fame wasn't new. But this shift wasn't just professional, it was personal. He felt the show he had been promised as his own was being rewritten in real time, and his friend, the man he once laughed with between takes, was now the face of the phenomenon. And Howard would later admit that jealousy wasn't the heart of it. He could handle sharing fame. What broke him was ego. Winkler, basking in the glow of stardom, allegedly began pushing for more lines, more screen time, more control. The scripts tilted toward Fonzie, and the writers followed the money. Richie Cunningham, once the soul of the show, became a supporting act in his own story. Behind the scenes, Howard's patience wore thin. The atmosphere turned tense. While Winkler relished the adoration, Howard felt his integrity and trust being betrayed. He had signed onto a family show built on ensemble spirit, only to watch it morph into a one-man circus. For someone who values fairness above all else, the shift was unbearable. NTHE breaking point came quietly. By the end of the 1970s, Ron Howard made a bold move. He left acting behind entirely. Instead of chasing more sitcoms or feature roles, he turned to directing, the place where he could build the kind of creative family he'd always wanted. His exit wasn't just career ambition, it was an escape. He walked away not only from Happy Days but also from Winkler, once his closest ally. Years later, both men were asked about their fallout. Winkler often danced around the subject, sometimes hinting at reconciliation, other times avoiding the wound. But Howard? His response was always steady, polite, but firm. He refused to reignite the friendship. To him, the betrayal of Happy Days wasn't just show business. It was personal, the kind of disillusionment you don't forgive easily. And fans for decades hoped for a reunion. They dreamed of Richie and Fonzie standing side by side again, smiling for the cameras, reclaiming the innocence of television's golden age. But Howard never went back. He never returned for spin-offs, never sought a cameo, never allowed nostalgia to rewrite history. The blacklist was written, quietly but permanently. NFOR, a man known for patience. This feud is a reminder that even Hollywood's kindest soul has boundaries. Winkler crossed a line that Howard could not forget. He put ego before trust, spotlight before friendship. In Howard's world, that's the one sin that cannot be forgiven. And so, the story of Richie and Fonzie, once America's most beloved duo, ends not with a warm reunion, but with silence. Ron Howard walked away, and he never looked back. When Ron Howard first set his sights on A Beautiful Mind, he knew the role of John Nash. The troubled mathematical genius whose brilliance teetered on the edge of madness would demand an actor capable of both power and vulnerability. In Russell Crowe, fresh off the triumph of Gladiator, Howard saw his perfect Nash. The pairing promised greatness, a director famous for heart and humanity, and an actor renowned for raw, visceral performances. On paper, it was destiny. In practice, it was chaos. From the moment Crowe arrived on set, his reputation preceded him. He was already known in Hollywood as unpredictable, commanding, mercurial, quick to flare into rage. Howard, the eternal optimist, believed he could tame that storm, that his collaborative style might soften Crowe's edges. But instead, he found himself staring into the eye of a hurricane. and Crowe's method acting was extreme. To embody Nash, he insisted on mimicking the mathematician's quirks around the clock. He mumbled equations under his breath, refused casual conversation, and demanded silence during moments when inspiration struck. Crew members whispered that even meals became unbearable, with Crowe slipping into character mid-bite, eyes distant, voice brittle with paranoia. At first, Howard encouraged the dedication, but as days stretched into weeks, the atmosphere shifted. What was supposed to be creative immersion became suffocating control. Tension boiled in small, unsettling moments. Crowe would bristle at adjustments, rejecting Howard's calm direction with gruff retorts. Scenes stretched into endless takes, not because Howard lacked clarity, but because Crowe refused compromise. The crew, long accustomed to Howard's warm, family-like sets, suddenly felt they were walking on eggshells. Whispered jokes disappeared. Laughter between takes dried up. Where there had been camaraderie, there was now fear. Fear of Crowe's temper. Fear of Howard's patience snapping. NTHE breaking point came during a pivotal scene in which Nash, gripped by delusion, confronts the ghosts of his imagination. Howard envisioned it intimate, subtle, a slow burn of emotion. Crowe, however, wanted fury, grand gestures, and volcanic outbursts. Their visions clashed violently. On set, voices rose, silence fell, and for the first time in his career, Ron Howard, the unshakable calm, lost his composure. Though accounts differ, crew members later admitted it was the closest they had ever seen him come to walking off his own set. And yet, here lies the paradox. The very performance that nearly broke Howard was also the one that earned him glory. Crowe's intensity, though maddening, electrified the screen. His Nash was haunting, brilliant, unforgettable. When the film swept the Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Howard, the world cheered their partnership. But behind the curtain, Howard made a quiet decision: never again. In interviews, Howard has always chosen his words carefully. He praises Crowe's talent, his power, his undeniable ability to transform a role. But he never romanticizes the process. He never paints the experience as joyful or fulfilling. The compliments are measured, almost clinical, as though acknowledging genius while shielding himself from the memory of the storm. NFOR Howard, the lesson was brutal but clear. Sometimes, brilliance comes at too steep a cost. The film may have been a masterpiece, but the road to get there left scars. Crowe, for all his talent, had violated Howard's most sacred value: collaboration. What Howard builds with patience and respect, Crowe bulldozed with ego and intensity. In Hollywood, where reputation spread faster than scripts, this unspoken blacklist mattered. Howard, the man who works with anyone, the director who nurtures trust, quietly vowed never to endure that storm again. Russell Crowe gave Ron Howard an Oscar-winning performance. But he also gave him a nightmare, a reminder that not all victories are worth the battlefield they're fought on. By the late 1990s, Ron Howard had built a reputation not just as a director, but as a guardian of order. His sets were known for their calm, their precision, their trust. Yet in Hollywood, not every actor respects boundaries, and no one tested Howard's patience more recklessly than Tom Sizemore. At the time, Sizemore was the kind of actor casting directors craved. He had an edge, a raw magnetism, the ability to play soldiers, gangsters, and troubled men with frightening authenticity. When Howard cast him in Ransom alongside Mel Gibson, it seemed like a smart gamble. Sizemore would bring intensity, Howard would harness it into discipline. But Howard didn't fully grasp the monster lurking beneath, the monster of addiction. From the first days of filming, warning signs emerged. Sizemore was erratic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes absent-minded, sometimes missing altogether. Rumors circulated that his demons followed him everywhere. Late-night parties, missed call times, and eyes clouded by something far darker than exhaustion. On Howard's set, where professionalism was sacred, this behavior wasn't just disruptive, it was poisonous. And Howard, ever patient, tried the gentle approach. He offered understanding, space, second chances. He believed in redemption, in the idea that even the most troubled actor could rise above chaos with the right guidance. But Sizemore's spiral was relentless. One day he would arrive with explosive energy, electrifying his scenes with fire. The next, he'd stumble through lines, distant and hollow. The inconsistency left cast and crew on edge. Every day became a coin toss. Which Sizemore would show up? Tensions escalated during a critical sequence when his character was meant to deliver a performance of menace and precision. Instead, Sizemore drifted, slurring lines, unable to hold focus. Howard, normally a director of infinite patience, found himself repeating instructions, re-explaining moments, begging for concentration. But Sizemore wasn't present. Not truly. What should have been a day's work stretched into nights, eating into budgets, testing tempers. For Howard, whose directing style depends on trust, the betrayal was unbearable. Worse still, Sizemore's off-screen antics bled into production. Stories circulated of violent outbursts, of brushes with law enforcement, of chaos that followed him like a shadow. Cast members grew wary, some even afraid. Howard's dream of building a supportive, collaborative family on set was crumbling under the weight of one man's demons. NTHE final straw came quietly, not with a dramatic explosion but with exhaustion. Howard realized he could no longer shield his cast and crew from Sizemore's volatility. He wrapped the film, delivered the performances he could salvage, and made a silent vow: never again. In interviews afterward, Howard rarely mentioned Sizemore by name. But those close to the director knew. This wasn't just another actor who had disappointed him. This was someone who had broken the unspoken code of respect, dragging chaos into a place meant for creation. Years later, as Sizemore's career unraveled under the weight of arrests, scandals, and public meltdowns, Howard's instincts seemed prophetic. Hollywood is a place of second chances. But for Howard, whose blacklist is short and sacred, Sizemore had crossed an unforgivable line. The director who believes in collaboration had seen what happens when addiction drowns out professionalism. And for him, that breach was permanent. In the end, Sizemore's story is a tragedy, an actor of immense talent consumed by his own self-destruction. But for Ron Howard, it is also a warning. Talent alone can't save you. On a Howard set, respect is the only currency that matters. Sizemore spent his, and the debt was never repaid. Long before Ron Howard was a respected director, before Apollo 13 or A Beautiful Mind, he was Opie, the freckle-faced son of Andy Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. To millions of Americans in the 1960s, he wasn't acting, he was family. The chemistry on screen felt warm and genuine, as if the small-town world of Mayberry really existed. But behind the laughter and whistled theme song, there was one figure who made young Ron's life more difficult than fans ever realized. Frances Bavier, the actress who played Aunt Bee. NTO viewers, Aunt Bee was the heart of Mayberry, nurturing, gentle, endlessly kind. On screen, she was the maternal anchor of the Taylor household, guiding Opie with affection and wisdom. But off-screen, Bavier was nothing like the character she portrayed. For Ron Howard, barely 6 years old when the show began, the difference was heartbreaking. Aunt Bavier was known for being difficult, even with adults. She demanded perfection, bristled at improvisation, and often clashed with Andy Griffith himself. But it was her coldness toward Ron that left a scar. Unlike his castmates, who treated him with warmth and patience, Bavier reportedly viewed Ron not as a child, but as a distraction, someone slowing down her work, a reminder that Hollywood sets were rarely as magical as they appeared. Crew members later revealed moments that haunted the young actor. Between takes, when Ron sought comfort or conversation, Bavier would retreat into silence. She wasn't cruel with words, but with distance, with an emotional wall that separated her from the boy who desperately needed reassurance. For a child, silence can cut deeper than anger. Howard felt it keenly, sensing a rejection he couldn't explain. Andy Griffith, protective of his young co-star, often tried to shield Ron from Bavier's moods. He cracked jokes, created games, and filled the air with kindness to counteract the frost. But even Griffith couldn't erase the sting, when the woman America believed was Ron's on-screen mother figure turned away from him in real life. The irony was brutal. In the story, Aunt Bee was Opie's loving caregiver. In reality, the actress playing her wanted little to do with him. NFOR Ron, who would later become a director obsessed with harmony on set. These early wounds were formative. He learned, painfully, what it felt like to be in an environment where trust and warmth were absent. He also learned the importance of protecting young actors, of creating spaces where vulnerability could thrive instead of being crushed. Francis Bavier taught him, by example, what not to be. Their estrangement lasted decades. After the Andy Griffith Show ended, Ron never rebuilt a relationship with Bavier. She retreated into isolation, living a reclusive life in North Carolina. Reports suggest she regretted some of her behavior, even attempting to reconcile with Andy Griffith late in her life, but she never mended the rift with Ron. The distance remained, an unspoken scar from his earliest years in Hollywood. In interviews, Howard has always chosen his words carefully when asked about her. He avoids bitterness, avoids accusations, but his silence speaks volumes. Unlike other castmates he praises with warmth, his comments about Bavier are measured, restrained, as though protecting himself from reopening an old wound. NFOR fans, the revelation is almost unthinkable. Aunt Bee, the gentle soul of Mayberry, was cold to the little boy she was supposed to love. For Ron Howard, the reality was sobering. It was his first lesson in the illusions of Hollywood. How the smiles we see on screen don't always exist when the cameras stop rolling. In his adult life, Howard has often said that kindness and collaboration are his highest priorities as a director. Perhaps that's the final legacy of Frances Bavier in his story. She showed him the pain of a set without compassion, and in response, he vowed never to let another child, or another actor, feel that same emptiness again. By the time Ron Howard had solidified his reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable directors, he was no stranger to strong personalities. He had worked with icons, geniuses, and rebels. But nothing quite tested his patience, like his experience with Shelley Long, an actress whose pursuit of perfection transformed what should have been a creative collaboration into a grueling tug-of-war. N.S. Shelley Long was, at the time, riding high on the success of Cheers. With her sharp comedic timing, her blend of wit and vulnerability, she had become one of television's most celebrated stars. When Howard cast her in Night Shift, 1982, a quirky comedy about undertakers who turn their workplace into a lovable mess of misadventures, the pairing seemed like a match made in heaven. Long's charm and Howard's lighthearted direction should have produced magic. Instead, the production became an endless test of wills. From the very beginning, Long's perfectionism became the center of gravity on set. Every scene, every line delivery, every gesture had to be analyzed, debated, and reworked. While Howard thrived on spontaneity and collaboration, Long thrived on control. She questioned motivations, rewrote beats in her head, and pushed for take after take until she felt satisfied. For her, the smallest detail could unravel the entire performance. For Howard, the constant nitpicking drained the life out of the comedy, and the tension grew visible. Co-stars Henry Winkler and Michael Keaton, both playful improvisers, leaned into Howard's rhythm, fast, loose, energetic, but Long resisted. Where Winkler and Keaton could discover sparks of brilliance in a throwaway moment, Long insisted on rehearsed precision. She demanded retakes that derailed schedules, challenged Howard's direction with icy firmness, and exuded a sense that the film's success depended on her control. The laughter that should have defined the set began to disappear, and Howard, ever the diplomat, tried patience first. He encouraged her to loosen up, to trust the process, to lean into the chemistry of her co-stars. But Long wasn't swayed. To her, improvisation wasn't discovery, it was sloppiness. Each clash left Howard more drained, forced to balance the comedic chaos of Winkler and Keaton against Long's rigid structure. What was supposed to be fun began to feel like a battlefield of egos. Crew members recalled the atmosphere shifting whenever Long entered a scene. Where Keaton brought spontaneity, she brought tension. Where Winkler smiled and charmed, she dissected and critiqued. The imbalance was undeniable. And for Howard, who believed deeply in building ensembles that felt like family, Long's presence was a constant reminder of how fragile that harmony could be. The final film was released to mixed reception. Night Shift gained a cult following in later years, mostly for Michael Keaton's wild breakout performance. But behind the scenes, the toll was clear. Howard walked away exhausted, frustrated, and vowing never to work with Shelley Long again. To this day, Her name remains one of the rare blemishes on his otherwise glowing record of collaborations. And ironically, Long's perfectionism didn't translate into lasting stardom. Though she was once seen as the heir to Lucille Ball, her career stalled after leaving Cheers. She struggled to maintain her footing in Hollywood, becoming a cautionary tale of talent undone by reputation. Howard, meanwhile, soared, building one of the most respected directing careers of his generation. NFOR Howard, the lesson was sharp. Brilliance can never come at the cost of harmony. On his sets, laughter and trust aren't luxuries. They're the foundation. Shelley Long's relentless pursuit of perfection may have been admirable in theory, but in practice, it destroyed the joy of creation. And for a man like Howard, who values spirit as much as product, that breach was unforgivable. N.S. Shelley Long's chapter in Ron Howard's story is one of frustration, not rage, less a scandal than a sorrow. But it is no less important. She showed him that talent without trust is useless, and perfection without playfulness is poison. And once that line was crossed, Long's name was etched onto Howard's quiet, unspoken blacklist, forever. By 2017, Ron Howard had already earned his place among Hollywood's most dependable directors. When studios needed someone to rescue a troubled production, he was the man they called. And never was that reputation tested more than when Solo: A Star Wars Story began to spiral into chaos. At the heart of the storm were directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller, two filmmakers whose playful, improvisational style clashed violently with Howard's steady professionalism, nearly destroying one of the most beloved franchises in movie history. Lord and Miller were rising stars. Fresh off the success of the Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street, they were known for injecting irreverence into blockbusters, finding comedy where others saw structure. When Lucasfilm handed them the keys to Han Solo's origin story, fans were curious but cautious. Star Wars was sacred ground. Would their winking, joke-heavy style fit? From the very first days of shooting, the answer became obvious. None. Their approach baffled both cast and crew. Scenes meant to capture the grit and swagger of a young Han Solo devolved into endless improvisation. Actors were pushed to ad-lib dialogue, to ignore carefully crafted scripts, to lean into comedy at moments that demanded gravitas. For Alden Ehrenreich, the young actor carrying the impossible weight of stepping into Harrison Ford's shoes, the lack of clear direction was devastating. He struggled to find a consistent tone, while Lord and Miller encouraged experimentation that often left him adrift. Behind the scenes, the crew grew restless. Star Wars productions are machines. Tight schedules, massive budgets, an army of designers, technicians, and artists, moving in lockstep. Improvisation, which might work on a small comedy set, became chaos in the galaxy far, far away. Scenes stretched for hours longer than scheduled. Reshoots piled up, and whispers spread through Lucasfilm that the film was spiraling out of control. And Kathleen Kennedy, the head of Lucasfilm, had seen enough. The experiment was failing, and the risk of tarnishing Star Wars was too great. In a stunning move, she fired Lord and Miller mid-production, a decision that rocked Hollywood. And when it came time to pick up the pieces, she turned to the one man she trusted most: Ron Howard. Howard walked into a battlefield. The film was half finished, the cast demoralized, the crew exhausted, and the budget bleeding. His task wasn't just to direct, it was to rebuild faith. Immediately, he restored order. Improvisation was cut down, scripts were followed, and his calm, professional tone recentered the production. But salvaging Solo meant one thing: throwing out much of what Lord and Miller had built. Entire sequences were reshot, scenes reimagined, and their fingerprints scrubbed from the final cut. NTHE fallout was ugly. Lord and Miller, humiliated, hinted in interviews that their creative freedom had been suffocated, that they had been punished for daring to be different. But Howard, careful as always, chose diplomacy. He never publicly trashed them, never aired the chaos he had inherited. Still, those close to him knew. Their names were etched into his personal blacklist, not out of anger, but out of principle. To Howard, their reckless improvisation had betrayed the spirit of collaboration, risking not just a film, but an entire legacy. In the end, Solo was released to mixed reviews. Some praised its polish, others felt its energy had been neutered. But one truth was clear: without Ron Howard, the film might never have made it to theaters at all. And though he saved the project, the experience left scars. NFOR Howard, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, represented the ultimate professional betrayal, not of him personally, but of the trust a director owes to cast, crew, and story. They gambled with chaos. He paid the price of order. And in Hollywood, where reputations live forever, theirs will never again cross his. When Ron Howard signed on to direct Hillbilly Elegy in 2020, it wasn't just another project. It was personal. The memoir, written by J.D. Vance, chronicled his rise from a troubled Appalachian childhood to Yale Law School, framed as a story of perseverance, family, and survival. For Howard, who had spent his career telling human, compassionate stories, it felt like the perfect fit, a chance to shine a light on forgotten communities with dignity and warmth. But what began as a passion project ended as one of the most bitter betrayals of his career. Howard approached the material with sincerity. He envisioned a film that would cut through stereotypes, that would portray working-class families, not as caricatures but as real, complicated people. Casting Glenn Close and Amy Adams, he created what should have been an Oscar contender. The performances were raw, the cinematography intimate, the story drenched in the kind of humanity Howard had always championed. Yet even before the film's release, controversy swirled, and it all traced back to J.D. Vance himself. In the years between publishing his memoir and Howard adapting it, Vance had transformed. Once positioned as an empathetic voice for struggling Appalachian families, he had shifted into politics, aligning himself with hardline positions and polarizing rhetoric. To many, his book was no longer just a story of survival. It was a manifesto used to score political points. Critics accused him of exploiting his background, turning the struggles of his family and community into ammunition for personal ambition. For Howard, the backlash was devastating. The film he had poured his heart into, intended as a compassionate portrait, was suddenly viewed through a political lens he never intended. Audiences weren't debating the performances or direction. They were dissecting Vance's politics, questioning the morality of even adapting the memoir at all. What should have been Howard's triumphant return to intimate drama became a lightning rod for culture wars. Behind the scenes, Howard reportedly felt blindsided. He had trusted Vance's story, believed in its authenticity, only to watch the author pivot into a figure of division. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was ideological. Howard had built his career on unity, on telling stories that crossed boundaries. Vance, meanwhile, was using Hillbilly Elegy as a stepping stone into political stardom, leaving Howard holding the baggage of controversy. The fallout was brutal. Critics tore the film apart, calling it tone-deaf, exploitative, even a campaign ad in disguise. The performances of Glenn Close and Amy Adams were praised, but the film's reputation was poisoned by association with Vance's politics. For Howard, who had weathered criticism before, this was different. This wasn't about artistic failure. It was about betrayal of trust. He had believed he was telling a human story, only to discover he had been a pawn in someone else's larger game. And Howard, characteristically, never lashed out publicly. In interviews, he defended the film's intentions, speaking softly about empathy and understanding. But those who know him say the experience left him shaken. To dedicate so much to a project, only to see its meaning hijacked, was a wound that cut deep. And in his quiet, careful way, Howard added J.D. Vance to his blacklist, not as an actor who disrupted a set, but as an author who betrayed the very spirit of storytelling. In Hollywood, feuds often revolve around ego, control, or chaos. But this was different. For Howard, the feud with Vance was about something bigger: integrity. The one thing he demands above all else is authenticity. And when Vance traded authenticity for politics, he burned a bridge that could never be rebuilt. Hillbilly Elegy should have been a triumph. Instead, it became a cautionary tale, not just for Ron Howard, but for Hollywood itself. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired. And in Howard's world, betrayal of purpose is the worst sin of all.